He was an injured veteran, broke and forgotten, living on disability checks in a town that had moved on without him. When a lawyer called saying he'd inherited an old warship from an uncle he barely knew, he thought it was a cruel joke. But when he limped aboard that rusting hulk of metal sitting in a forgotten naval yard, he discovered something that would silence every doubt, shake the military establishment, and prove that some secrets are worth more than gold. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights in the disability office buzzed like angry wasps, casting a sickly yellow glow over rows of plastic chairs bolted to cracked linoleum. Marcus Hayes sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor tiles he'd memorized over the past 18 months. 28 years old, but he looked 40. The pain did that. Pain and the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. His left leg, the one that took shrapnel outside Kandahar 3 years ago, throbbed with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The doctors had saved it mostly, but it would never be the same. None of him would. The leg was just the visible part. The rest, the nightmares, the way loud noises made his hands shake, the inability to hold down a job because some days he couldn't get out of bed, that stuff didn't show up on X-rays. He shifted his weight in the uncomfortable chair, grimacing as the movement sent lightning up his spine. The woman behind the bulletproof glass window was explaining something about paperwork. Again, always more paperwork, always more waiting. Her voice was flat, worn down by years of delivering bad news to people who'd given everything and gotten so little in return. "Mr. Hayes," she said, not even looking up from her computer screen, "your appeal has been denied. You can resubmit with additional documentation, but that process takes 6 to 8 months. In the meantime, your current benefits remain unchanged." Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He'd stopped arguing months ago. Arguing took energy he no longer had, energy he needed just to make it through the day. Unchanged meant $973 a month. Enough to cover rent on his studio apartment, some food, and not much else. Definitely not enough to cover the medical bills that kept piling up, the physical therapy the VA wouldn't fully cover, or the medications that cost more than groceries. "Is there anything else?" the woman asked, her tone making it clear she hoped there wasn't. "No, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. He pushed himself up from the chair, his right hand gripping the armrest, taking most of his weight as his left leg protested. The walk to the door felt longer than it should have, 20 feet stretching into 20 miles. He could feel other veterans watching him, some with sympathy, others with the blank stare of people who'd already given up. Outside, the Virginia rain hammered the sidewalk, turning everything grey and cold. November had settled in early this year, bringing with it the kind of dampness that seeped into old injuries and made them sing. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter, the one with the frayed cuffs and the broken zipper he kept meaning to fix. His truck, a 2007 Ford with more rust than paint, sat in the far corner of the parking lot. He'd parked there deliberately, away from the nice cars, the ones that belonged to people whose bodies still worked the way bodies were supposed to work. The drive back to his apartment took 40 minutes through afternoon traffic. He kept the radio off. It had stopped working back in June, but he hadn't bothered to fix it. What was the point? The silence matched what was happening inside his head anyway, that constant static of pain and worry and exhaustion that had become the soundtrack of his life. His apartment building sat on the edge of town, the kind of place landlords bought cheap and forgot about. Peeling paint, cracked concrete, a parking lot full of potholes that filled with water every time it rained. The elevator was broken again, the handwritten out-of-order sign taped to the doors now yellowed with age. Marcus stared at the stairwell leading up to the 3rd floor and felt something close to despair. 3 flights, 42 steps. He'd counted them once when he couldn't sleep, standing at the bottom at 2 in the morning, wondering if he had the strength to climb them. He gripped the railing with white knuckles and started up, one step at a time, pulling himself more than walking, his breathing harsh in the empty stairwell. Inside his apartment, the silence was different, heavier somehow. The space was barely furnished. A sagging couch he'd found on Craigslist for $50, a folding table that wobbled, a mattress on the floor in the bedroom because he'd sold the frame to make rent 3 months ago. No pictures on the walls, no plants, nothing that required care or commitment. He'd learned to live small, to need nothing, to expect even less. He heated up a can of soup on the hot plate, the good one-burner model that had replaced his broken stove. While it heated, he stood at the window, looking down at the parking lot where rain pooled around overflowing storm drains. A couple hurried to their car, laughing, sharing an umbrella, their lives touching in ways Marcus couldn't quite remember how to do anymore. The soup was chicken noodle, store brand, 39 cents on sale. He ate it standing at the counter, not bothering with a bowl, just spooning it straight from the pot. It was easier that way. Fewer dishes, less effort, less evidence of the small, quiet ways his life had shrunk to almost nothing. That's when his phone rang. The sound startled him so much he nearly dropped the pot. Nobody called anymore. His friends from before the injury had drifted away, their invitations growing less frequent until they stopped altogether. His mum called once a month, duty calls that neither of them enjoyed, both pretending things were better than they were. The only other calls were from collection agencies about medical bills, and he'd stopped answering those. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. His first instinct was to ignore it. Probably another collections call, another reminder of debts he couldn't pay. But something made him swipe to answer. Maybe curiosity. Maybe just the desperate hope that anything different might be better than the same. Hello? Is this Marcus Hayes? A man's voice asked. Professional, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone in a suit. Yeah, who's this? My name is Jeffrey Brennan. I'm an attorney with Coastal Legal Services in Norfolk. I'm calling about the estate of Raymond Hayes. Marcus frowned, his tired brain trying to place the name. I don't know anyone named Raymond Hayes. He was your uncle, your father's brother. He passed away 3 months ago, and according to his will, you're listed as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The words didn't register at first. Marcus set the pot down carefully, soup forgotten. I think you have the wrong person. My dad didn't have a brother. I mean, he never mentioned one. According to our records, Raymond Hayes was your father's older brother. They were estranged for many years. Your father passed away when you were quite young, is that correct? I was 7. The words came out flat, carrying weight Marcus rarely acknowledged. His father had been a distant figure even before the cancer took him, a man who'd worked long hours and said little. Marcus's memories of him were fragmented, the smell of motor oil, calloused hands, and a sadness that seemed to live in his eyes. That would explain why you weren't aware of the relationship, Jeffrey continued. The estrangement occurred before you were born. However, Raymond made it very clear in his will that he wanted you to have what he left behind, despite the family history. Marcus moved to the couch and sat down slowly, his bad leg stretched out in front of him. This had to be a scam. Had to be. People didn't just inherit things from relatives they'd never heard of. That only happened in movies. What exactly are we talking about here? What did he leave? There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that comes before something significant. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. Are you able to come to Norfolk, to the Naval Yards specifically? The Naval Yards? Marcus felt his confusion deepening. What does that have to do with anything? Mr. Hayes, your uncle left you a ship, a decommissioned naval vessel. It's been in dry dock for approximately 30 years. Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound that came out harsher than he intended. You're telling me I inherited a boat? Not a boat, Mr. Hayes. A warship. A Fletcher-class destroyer, to be precise. The USS Rickman, decommissioned in 1974. And before you ask, no, this isn't a prank or a scam. I have all the documentation here: death certificate, will, ship registration, transfer of ownership papers. This is legitimate. Marcus stared at the wall across from him, at the water stain that looked like a map of some country he'd never visit. A warship, an uncle he'd never known, an inheritance that sounded more like a burden than a gift. His mind tried to process it, but the pieces wouldn't fit together. What am I supposed to do with a warship? That's entirely up to you, Jeffrey said, his tone professionally neutral. Most people in your situation sell them for scrap. The metal alone has considerable value. But there are other options: historic preservation, museum donation, private restoration. We can discuss all of that when you come in. I can walk you through your options and the legal requirements for transfer of ownership. When do you need me there? As soon as possible, really. Tomorrow morning if you can manage it. Say 9 o'clock? I'll text you the address. There are some time-sensitive matters regarding dock fees and property maintenance that we need to address. After he hung up, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness of his apartment for a long time. He didn't turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate somehow, matching the confusion swirling in his head. A warship. The word felt absurd in his mouth when he said it aloud. I inherited a warship. He pulled out his laptop, the old one with the cracked screen and the battery that only held a charge for 20 minutes. He typed in Fletcher-class destroyer and watched images load slowly on his terrible internet connection. Massive grey vessels bristling with guns, ships that had fought in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Ships that had carried crews of hundreds, that had sailed into combat, that represented an era of American naval power that felt impossibly distant from his tiny apartment and his disability checks and his cans of soup. He found specifications: 314 feet long, 2,050 tons, top speed 35 knots. The images showed vessels both in their prime, cutting through ocean waves with American flags flying, and in retirement, rusting in shipyards, forgotten monuments to conflicts most people only knew from history books. Marcus looked up the USS Rickman specifically. Built in 1943 at the Federal Shipbuilding and Drydock Company in New Jersey. Commissioned in 1944, saw action in the Pacific Theater during the final year of World War II. Participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, earned 3 battle stars, served in the Korean War, later served in Vietnam. Decommissioned in 1974. After that, the information went dark. No mention of what happened to it next, where it went, who owned it. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning through possibilities. Maybe it was worth something. Maybe, for the first time in years, luck had tilted in his direction. Maybe this was the break he needed. The thing that could pull him out of the hole he'd been living in. Or maybe it was just another weight to carry, another responsibility he didn't have the resources to handle, another thing that would cost more than it was worth. By 5 in the morning, he gave up on sleep. He made instant coffee, showered in water that never quite got hot enough, and pulled on the only pair of jeans he owned that didn't have holes. The drive to Norfolk would take about 2 hours, maybe more depending on traffic. He left by 6:30, wanting to arrive early, wanting time to see this ship before the lawyer showed up with his paperwork and his professional explanations. The highway was mostly empty, just early morning commuters and long-haul truckers. Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel, the old truck rattling on the highway, his coffee going cold in the cup holder. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving everything wet and grey. The sky looked like brushed steel, heavy with clouds that threatened more rain. He followed his GPS through increasingly industrial areas as he got closer to Norfolk. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, warehouses with broken windows, railroad tracks that looked like they hadn't seen a train in decades. The naval yards, when he finally found them, were exactly what he'd expected. massive, sprawling, and forgotten. Security at the main gate was minimal, just an aging guard in a booth who barely looked up when Marcus showed his ID. The lawyer's office was in a small brick building near the main gate, one story, functional, the kind of place that existed to handle paperwork and nothing else. But Marcus didn't go there first. He wanted to see the ship. Jeffrey's email had included the dock number, Pier 7, berth 4. He drove slowly through the yards, following faded signs, passing rows of mothballed vessels in various states of decay. Some were massive aircraft carriers being slowly dismantled, their flight decks cut into sections, cranes lifting pieces away like surgeons removing organs. Others were submarines resting on concrete blocks like beached whales, their black hulls streaked with rust. Still others were smaller vessels, destroyers, frigates, patrol boats, all of them waiting for decisions that might never come. And then he saw it. The USS Rickman sat in a dry dock, elevated on steel supports that lifted it 3 stories above the ground. It was bigger than Marcus had imagined, even after looking at all those pictures. 314 feet translated into something different when you saw it in person, when you stood at the base of those massive supports and looked up at a hull that towered over you like a steel cliff face. The ship was painted grey, or had been once. Now it was a patchwork of rust and peeling paint, brown and orange streaks running down from every seam and rivet like wounds that had never healed. The deck was cluttered with debris, tarps, chains, equipment that had been left to rot. The gun turrets, 5 of them, pointed at various angles toward nothing, their barrels dark circles against the grey sky. Windows in the superstructure were either broken or so dirty they looked black. Marcus got out of his truck slowly, his bad legs stiff from the long drive. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring up at this thing he now apparently owned. It looked like a ghost, like something from another era that had wandered into the present by mistake and didn't know how to get back. Birds had nested in the radar equipment. Weeds grew from cracks in the dry dock concrete. The whole scene felt abandoned, forgotten, sad in a way that made Marcus's chest tight. Impressive, isn't it? Marcus turned to see a man walking toward him, mid-50s, wearing a suit that had seen better days. Wire-rimmed glasses, thinning hair carefully combed. He was carrying a leather briefcase and a styrofoam cup of coffee. "Jeffrey Brennan," the man said, extending his hand. "You must be Marcus. I saw you drive past the office." Marcus shook his hand. "Yeah, I wanted to see it first." "Of course. It's quite a sight. I've been handling your uncle's estate for 6 months now, and I still can't quite believe this thing exists." Jeffrey gestured toward the ship. "Shall we go aboard? I have the keys." They walked to the base of a long metal gangway that led up to the deck. It looked precarious, rust-stained and creaking, but Jeffrey started up without hesitation. Marcus followed more slowly, gripping the railing, taking his time, feeling every step in his injured leg. By the time he reached the top, he was breathing hard, pain radiating from his hip to his ankle. But when he stepped onto the deck, the pain faded to background noise. The space was enormous, open to the sky, stretching from the bow to the stern in both directions. Everything was on a massive scale, bollards as thick as trees, chains that looked like they could anchor the world, hatches big enough to drive a car through. Under the rust and neglect, you could still see the engineering, the precision, the care that had gone into building something like this. "Your uncle purchased this ship at a government auction in 1985, Jeffrey explained, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. He paid $43,000 for it. At the time, the Navy was decommissioning dozens of older vessels, selling them off for scrap or private ownership. Most buyers were salvage companies that stripped them for metal. Your uncle was one of the few private individuals to make a purchase." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would someone buy a warship?" Jeffrey shrugged. "The records don't say, but he spent the next 3 decades maintaining it, paid dock fees every year, hired security, even did some restoration work. According to the harbour master, he came here at least twice a month until about 5 years ago when his health started failing. Marcus walked across the deck, his boots echoing on metal. He ran his hand along a railing, feeling the rough texture of rust and old paint. What was he like, Raymond? I never met him personally, Geoffrey admitted. I inherited his estate from a senior partner who passed away last year. But from what I understand, your uncle was career Navy, served from 1956 through 1984, 28 years, mostly on destroyers. He retired as a commander, never married, no children, lived alone in a small house near Virginia Beach until his death. How did he die? Heart attack. He was found at home. The coroner said it was quick. Geoffrey paused. There's something else you should know. When we went through his personal effects, we found very little. No photos, no letters, no personal items beyond basic necessities. It was as if he'd deliberately erased any trace of himself beyond the legal documents. The only exception was his will and a sealed letter addressed to you. Marcus stopped walking. A letter? Geoffrey reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. Marcus's name was written on the front in careful, old-fashioned script. He left instructions that this should be given to you only after you'd taken possession of the ship. Marcus took the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands. Can I open it? It's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. For a moment, Marcus just held it. This message from an uncle he'd never known, a man who'd shared his blood but remained a complete stranger. Then he carefully tore open the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, neat and precise. Marcus, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've made it aboard the Rickman. Good. You're curious. That's important. I never met you, but I knew your father. We stopped speaking long before you were born. Old wounds, old anger, things that don't matter now. But I kept track of both of you from a distance. When I learned you'd enlisted, that you'd been wounded, that you'd come home to nothing, I knew you were the one. This ship isn't what it appears to be. It's not just metal and memories. It's something more. I spent 30 years protecting what's inside, waiting for the right person to pass it to. Someone who would understand. Someone who'd been through the fire and knew what service really cost. Take your time exploring. Look carefully. Not everything is obvious. And when you find what I left for you, remember this. You earned it. Every person who puts on a uniform earns it. But most never see justice for that sacrifice. Consider this justice, delayed but delivered. Your uncle, Raymond. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his hands beginning to shake. Not just metal and memories. Something more, protected for 30 years. What I left for you. The words seemed to pulse on the page, heavy with meaning he couldn't quite grasp. Everything all right? Geoffrey asked. Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Yeah, just processing. I understand. It's a lot to take in. Geoffrey pulled out more documents. I have the transfer papers here. Once you sign, the ship is legally yours, along with all contents and fixtures. I should warn you, there are ongoing costs. The dry dock rental is about $2,000 a month. Security is another $500. Basic maintenance, even minimal, runs several thousand more per year. Your uncle had prepaid through the end of this year, but after that, the costs fall to you. What if I can't afford it? Then you'd need to make a decision quickly. Sell it for scrap, donate it to a museum, find a preservation group that might take it on. But I'd advise exploring it first. Your uncle's letter suggests there might be value beyond just the metal. Marcus signed the papers, his signature looking small and uncertain at the bottom of all that legal language. Geoffrey handed him a ring of keys, at least 15 of them, all different sizes. These open various hatches and compartments throughout the ship. I'm not sure which is which. Your uncle kept detailed logs, but they're stored in the ship's office below deck. Can I look around now? Of course. Take all the time you need. Just be careful. Some areas might not be structurally sound, and call me if you have questions." Jeffrey handed him a business card. "My cell number's on the back." After the lawyer left, Marcus stood alone on the deck of the USS Rickman. The morning had warmed slightly, the clouds beginning to break up, letting occasional shafts of sunlight through. In that light, the ship looked different, less ghostly, more real. He could imagine it cutting through ocean waves, its engines thrumming, its crew moving with purpose across these same decks. He found a hatch leading below deck and tried different keys until one worked. The door swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow corridor leading down into darkness. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and descended carefully, one hand on the railing, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. Inside, the ship was a maze. Corridors branched off in multiple directions, marked with faded signs. Crew quarters, galley, engine room, sickbay, communications, armory. The air was stale but surprisingly dry. Marcus had expected mold, water damage, the smell of decay. Instead, it smelled like machine oil and old metal, the scent of something preserved rather than abandoned. He explored methodically, room by room. The crew quarters still had their bunk beds, 3 high, with thin mattresses long gone. Personal lockers lined the walls, their doors hanging open, empty. The galley was vast, with industrial ovens and steel prep tables bolted to the floor. Coffee pots still sat on burners. Plates were stacked in cupboards. It was as if the crew had simply walked off one day, leaving everything in place. The engine room was cathedral-like in its scale. Massive turbines rose 3 stories high. Pipes thick as tree trunks ran in every direction. Valves, gauges, control panels covered every surface. Marcus stood in the center of that space, his flashlight beam getting lost in the shadows above, and felt something close to awe. Men had worked here, in brutal heat, through battles and storms, keeping the ship alive. As he explored deeper, moving through officers' country, past the wardroom and the captain's cabin, he began to notice something odd. Some spaces were cleaner than others. Not spotless, but maintained. Certain corridors showed signs of recent foot traffic, faint scuff marks in the dust, paths where someone had walked regularly. Some hatches had newer locks, shinier, less corroded than the originals. Someone had been taking care of this ship, recently, specifically. Marcus's pulse quickened. He thought about his uncle's letter, not just metal and memories, protected for 30 years. Look carefully. He moved through the ship with new purpose now, looking for anything that didn't fit, anything unusual. In the aft section, below the waterline, past the crew mess and the machine shops, he found himself in a storage area filled with old equipment. And there, set into the bulkhead, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a hatch that was different from all the others. It was reinforced, heavy steel, with a combination lock that looked military-grade and recent, definitely not original to a ship built in 1943. The hatch itself was painted the same grey as the surrounding bulkhead, camouflaged, meant to blend in. Marcus ran his fingers along its edges, feeling the precision of the metalwork. He tried the keys Jeffrey had given him. None of them fit. This lock wasn't meant for keys. It needed a combination. He stood back, his mind racing. His uncle's letter had said to look carefully, that not everything was obvious, that he'd know what to do when he found it. Marcus thought about the letter, about what his uncle knew about him, about the only personal information that connected them. Family. His father. The brother Raymond had been estranged from, but had still kept track of. What would be meaningful enough to use as a combination? Then he remembered something Jeffrey had said. The letter was only supposed to be given after Marcus took possession of the ship. His uncle had been specific about that timing, and he'd signed it, "Your Uncle Raymond," acknowledging the family connection despite decades of silence. Family, father, the only thing they shared. Marcus thought about his father's birthday. March 14th, 1958. He'd been to his grave enough times to have that date burned into his memory. Day, month, year, 6 digits. His hands shook slightly as he knelt in front of the combination lock. The mechanism was well maintained, the dial turning smoothly under his fingers. 3, 1, 4, 5, 8. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard a click, deep and solid, the sound of tumblers falling into place. The lock released. Marcus sat back on his heels, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. Whatever his uncle had protected for 30 years, whatever he'd thought Marcus had earned, it was behind this hatch. He gripped the wheel lock in the center of the hatch and turned. It moved smoothly, too smoothly for something on a ship this old. Someone had maintained this mechanism, kept it functional, kept it ready. The hatch swung open and cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of oil and something else, something sharp and chemical, like preservation fluid. Inside was darkness, complete and absolute. His phone's flashlight couldn't penetrate more than a few feet. He could see the top rungs of a ladder, metal gleaming dully, leading down into what had to be a space that didn't exist on any official schematic of a Fletcher-class destroyer. Marcus thought about his uncle's letter one more time. You earned it. Consider this justice, delayed but delivered. He took a deep breath, gripped the ladder, and began to descend into whatever secret Raymond Hayes had spent 3 decades protecting. The ladder descended 15 feet into a chamber that shouldn't exist. Marcus's phone flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a space roughly 20 feet square, sealed and lined with what looked like industrial insulation. The air was cold, preserved, untouched by time. His boots hit the floor with a metallic clang that echoed in the confined space. He swept the flashlight around slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. Metal containers lined the walls, dozens of them, each one carefully labeled, dated, sealed with military precision. Some were long and flat like oversized briefcases. Others were square, reinforced with steel bands. And in the far corner, stacked neatly on wooden pallets, were smaller boxes that gleamed dully under his flashlight beam. Marcus moved forward slowly, his injured leg protesting the descent down the ladder, but forgotten now in the face of what he was seeing. The labels on the containers were faded but legible. Property of United States Navy, classified, do not open. Beneath that, in different ink, handwritten, Recovery Operation Whispertide, January 1973. His hands trembled as he reached for the nearest container. The latches were stiff but functional. He hesitated, some part of him understanding that opening this would change everything, that there was no going back once he crossed this threshold. Then he thought about his uncle's letter, about justice delayed but delivered, and he opened the latch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that still held the smell of preservatives, were documents, thick files bound with string. He pulled one out carefully and untied the binding. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all black and white, all showing what looked like a recovery operation at sea. Ships positioned around something in the water, divers going down, cargo being lifted by cranes, and in several photos, sailors standing on deck next to containers identical to the ones surrounding Marcus right now. He flipped through more photos. One showed a Soviet flag, partially visible on what looked like a submerged vessel. Another showed men in Navy uniforms examining gold bars laid out on a deck. Gold bars with Cyrillic lettering stamped into them. Marcus set the photos down carefully and opened another container. This one held papers, official-looking documents with government seals, all stamped with red letters. Top secret, classified, eyes only. Most were heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out. But enough remained to tell a story. A Soviet vessel, designation unknown, had gone down in international waters off the coast of Japan in December 1972. American intelligence suggested it was carrying valuable cargo. A recovery operation was authorized. Operation Whispertide. The documents detailed the mission: locate, recover, secure. Success was reported. But the final document, a mission summary, said simply, recovery attempted, no assets secured, mission concluded. Marcus stared at that line, no assets secured. But the photos showed otherwise. The photos showed gold bars, showed containers, showed a successful recovery. Someone had lied in the official report. Someone had buried the truth. He moved to another container, this one sealed with multiple locks. It took him 20 minutes to figure out how to open it, finally using a combination of keys from the ring Jeffrey had given him. Inside were more documents, but these were different. Personal logs written in his uncle's handwriting. He pulled out the first notebook and began to read. January 20th, 1973. We did it. 6 months of planning, 3 weeks of searching, and we finally found it. The Soviet freighter went down in 800 feet of water, but the cargo hold was intact. What we brought up, it's beyond anything command expected. Gold, bonds, artifacts, intelligence documents, enough to fund operations for years, enough to change everything. January 22nd, 1973. Commander issued orders today. Official report to state recovery was unsuccessful. All evidence to be secured and transferred to classified storage. Crew sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial. I don't understand the decision, but orders are orders. January 28th, 1973. Something's wrong. The cargo never made it to classified storage. Instead, it came back to the Rickman. Commander pulled me aside, said there were others involved now, people above his pay grade, said the cargo was too valuable to trust to the usual channels, said we needed to keep it safe until things settled down. The entries continued, becoming darker, more paranoid. Marcus flipped ahead. February 15th, 1973. First of the crew passed today. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. But Harris was 32 and healthy as a horse. I don't believe it. April 3rd, 1973. Another death. Car accident this time. That's 3 now. 3 men from the recovery team, all dead within 3 months. This isn't coincidence. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. He kept reading, watching the dates advance, watching the body count rise. By 1975, only 3 crew members from Operation Whispertide remained alive. Raymond, someone named Coleman, and another man identified only as Hatch. June 9th, 1975. Coleman's dead. They called it suicide, found in his apartment with a gun in his hand. But I know Coleman. He would never. That makes me and Hatch the last ones who know what really happened, who know where it all went. October 14th, 1976. Haven't heard from Hatch in 6 weeks. His phone's disconnected. His apartment is empty. Either he ran or they got him too. I have to assume I'm the last one now. The last one who knows. The last one they're looking for. The final entries detailed Raymond's plan. Purchase the Rickman at auction. Hide the cargo in a sealed chamber. Maintain the ship for decades. Wait until it was safe. Wait until the right person came along. And then, on the last page, dated just 3 months before his death. September 4th, last year. If you're reading this, Marcus, then I've finally stopped running. They never found it. They never will. 30 years I've protected this. 30 years of looking over my shoulder, wondering if today would be the day they figured it out. But they didn't. And now it's yours. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember, every man on that recovery team died for this. Don't let their sacrifice be for nothing. Marcus closed the notebook, his hands shaking. His uncle hadn't just hidden a secret. He'd spent 3 decades protecting it with his life, living in fear, watching his crewmates die one by one, knowing he could be next. And through it all, he'd kept the cargo safe, kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. But Marcus still didn't know what exactly the cargo was. He'd seen photos of gold bars, read about bonds and artifacts, but he hadn't actually seen them. Not yet. He stood slowly, his bad leg cramping from kneeling too long, and moved to the containers in the corner, the ones on the wooden pallets. He opened the first one and stopped breathing. Gold bars, 20 of them, stacked neatly, each one stamped with Cyrillic lettering and Soviet insignia. He pulled one out, nearly dropping it because he'd underestimated the weight. It was cold, dense, real. He set it down carefully and opened another container. More gold, and another, and another. His mind couldn't process it, couldn't calculate what he was looking at. He moved to a different set of containers, smaller ones, and found bearer bonds. Hundreds of them, each one worth $10,000 according to the face value. Some were American, some were from other countries. All of them old, yellowed with age, but potentially still valid. Another container held rare coins sealed in protective cases. Another held gems, uncut diamonds and rubies wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at his touch. Another held what looked like intelligence documents in Russian, the pages brittle but intact. Marcus sat down hard on the floor, his back against the cold metal wall. This was impossible. This was insane. This was a fortune beyond anything he could have imagined. His uncle had spent 3 decades protecting a treasure that could be worth millions, tens of millions, maybe more. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and started taking pictures. Evidence, proof. But even as he did, he realized how dangerous this was. The moment he told anyone, the moment this secret got out, everything would change. His uncle's log had made it clear. People had died for this. People were still looking for it. And now Marcus was the only person alive who knew where it was. He climbed back up the ladder, his thoughts racing, his body moving on autopilot. When he emerged back into the corridor, he had to lean against the wall, catching his breath, fighting down the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. What was he supposed to do with this? How was he supposed to handle something this big? His leg chose that moment to give out, the pain that he'd been ignoring for the past hour suddenly crashing over him like a wave. He crumpled, catching himself on his hands, gasping as the familiar agony shot from his hip to his ankle. He'd pushed too hard, moved too fast, forgotten his limitations in the excitement of discovery. He sat there on the floor of the corridor, sweating, breathing hard, wondering how he was going to get back to the ladder leading up to the deck. The stairs seemed impossibly far away. His phone showed it was almost noon. He'd been below deck for 3 hours. That's when he heard footsteps above, boots on metal, coming closer. Someone else was on the ship. Marcus froze, his heart hammering. Had someone followed him? Had they been watching? He fumbled for something, anything to use as a weapon, but there was nothing within reach. The footsteps grew louder, descending the ladder he'd come down hours ago. A flashlight beam appeared, sweeping the corridor. "Hello?" a voice called out. Male, older, with a rough edge that suggested years of smoking. "Anybody down here? Saw the hatch was open. This is private property. You're trespassing." Marcus forced himself to speak, his voice coming out strained. "I'm the owner, Marcus Hayes. I just took possession this morning." The footsteps stopped. The flashlight beam found him, pinning him against the wall like a spotlight. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in his 60s, wearing coveralls stained with oil and grease. He had a weathered face, sharp eyes, and the build of someone who'd spent a lifetime doing physical labor. "You're the nephew," the man said, not a question. "Jeffrey said you'd be coming around." He looked at Marcus's position on the floor, at the way he was holding his leg. "You hurt?" "Old injury," Marcus managed. "Just pushed too hard exploring." The man came closer and knelt down, professional, assessing. "Combat?" "Afghanistan, 3 years ago." "Let me guess. Shrapnel, hip or leg, probably screws holding it together. Hurts worse when you overdo it or when the weather changes." Marcus looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because I got the same thing. Different war. Vietnam. Took a round through the thigh in '68. Doctors said I'd never walk right again, proved them wrong, but they weren't completely wrong either. He extended a hand. Name's Dutch. I'm the yard mechanic. Been working here since '87. Your uncle hired me to keep an eye on the Rickman, do basic maintenance, make sure nobody tried to strip her for parts. Marcus shook his hand, grateful for the human contact, for someone who understood. You knew Raymond? About as well as anyone did, which wasn't much. He was a private man, came by regularly, always alone, never talked about himself. But he paid on time and he cared about this ship. That was enough for me. Dutch stood up and offered his hand again, this time to help Marcus up. Come on, let's get you topside. I got a first aid kit in my truck and some coffee that'll strip paint. With Dutch's help, Marcus made it back up to the deck. The older man was stronger than he looked, supporting most of Marcus's weight without complaint. They sat on a cargo hatch in the sunlight, and Dutch produced a battered thermos and 2 metal cups. It's not good, Dutch warned, pouring, but it's hot and it's strong. He wasn't lying. The coffee tasted like motor oil and determination, but it was exactly what Marcus needed. They sat in silence for a while, 2 veterans drinking terrible coffee on the deck of a warship, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. Found something down there, didn't you? Dutch said finally, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Something that put that look on your face. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to lie, to keep the secret. But something about Dutch, maybe the shared injury, maybe the way he'd helped without asking questions, made him want to trust. My uncle left something important. Dutch nodded slowly. Figured as much. Man doesn't pay to maintain a ship for 30 years unless there's a reason. Man doesn't hire security and check in every month unless he's protecting something. He sipped his coffee. None of my business what it is. But I'll tell you this, you're going to need help. This ship's too big for one person, especially one person with a bum leg. You're going to need someone who knows the layout, knows the systems, knows how to keep things running. Are you offering? I'm saying I've been taking care of her for 37 years. Hate to stop now. Plus, your uncle was good to me. Gave me work when nobody else would hire a vet with a limp and a bad attitude. Figure I owe him. Dutch pulled out a cigarette, lit it, took a long drag. Also figure if you inherited this ship, you inherited his problems too. Whatever he was protecting, whatever he was hiding from, that doesn't go away just because he died. Marcus thought about the logbook, about the crew members who'd died, about his uncle spending 3 decades looking over his shoulder. You think someone's still looking? I think secrets this old have a way of coming back around. I think powerful people don't forget. And I think you could use someone watching your back while you figure out what to do next. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time since descending into that hidden chamber. Dutch reminded him of the old-timers he'd known in the service, the ones who'd seen too much but kept showing up anyway, who understood loyalty ran deeper than paychecks. I need to go back down, Marcus said finally. There's more to catalogue, more to understand, but I need to do it smart this time, not rush, not push past my limits. Then we do it together, Dutch said. 2 bum legs are better than 1. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and Dutch systematically explored the hidden chamber. Dutch didn't ask what was in the containers, didn't press for details. He just helped Marcus document everything, take photos, make lists. His presence made the work manageable, both physically and mentally. They discovered the chamber had multiple sections, some hidden behind false walls that Dutch's experienced eye spotted immediately. Behind one wall, they found filing cabinets filled with documents, mission reports, intelligence briefings, intercepted communications. Behind another, they found equipment, cameras, recording devices, code-breaking machines, all obsolete now but cutting edge in the early 70s. And in a locked cabinet that took them an entire afternoon to open, they found personal effects, dog tags from each member of the recovery crew, along with brief written tributes from Raymond describing how each man had died. It was a memorial, hidden in darkness, maintained by a man who'd survived and never forgotten. Marcus read each tribute aloud while Dutch stood silently beside him. 17 men total, 17 deaths over 5 years, from 1973 to 1978. Some were listed as training accidents, others as illnesses, several as suicides, a few as random violence, muggings gone wrong, home invasions. But Raymond's notes made his suspicions clear. All of them had been murdered, all of them to protect whatever secret Operation Whispertide had uncovered. "Jesus Christ," Dutch muttered when Marcus finished reading. "Your uncle wasn't paranoid. He was the last man standing in a massacre." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his apartment staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying everything he'd seen. The gold, the bonds, the documents, the memorial to dead men. The weight of it all pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. His phone buzzed with a text from Dutch. "You okay? You left in a hurry." Marcus texted back, "Just processing. Come by the yard tomorrow. Got something to show you." The next morning, Marcus found Dutch in a small office tucked behind the dry dock, a space Marcus hadn't known existed. It was cramped, filled with filing cabinets and old equipment, but it was warm and dry. Dutch had coffee brewing and had spread papers across a scarred wooden desk. "Couldn't sleep either," Dutch said. "So I went through your uncle's maintenance logs, found some interesting patterns." He pointed to a chart he'd drawn. "See these dates? Every month for 30 years, your uncle came to the ship, always the same day, always alone, always stayed for exactly 3 hours, never varied." Marcus studied the chart. He was checking on it, making sure everything was secure. "Yeah, but look at this." Dutch pulled out another set of papers. "These are dock records, shows who came and went from this pier. Most months your uncle was the only visitor, but on these dates," he circled several entries in red, "someone else showed up. Always exactly 1 week after your uncle's visit. Always stayed less than 30 minutes. Different names each time, but I'd bet money it was the same person." Someone was watching him. Someone was checking up, making sure he was still coming, making sure the ship was still here. Your uncle knew they were doing it. That's why he never varied his schedule. He wanted them to think everything was normal, predictable. 30 years of the same routine, never giving them a reason to look closer. Marcus felt cold, despite the warm office. "Do you think they know? About the transfer? About me?" "Probably. Estate transfers are public record. If they've been watching this long, they're not going to stop now." Dutch lit a cigarette, offered one to Marcus, who declined. "Question is, what do you do about it?" Before Marcus could answer, they heard it. The sound of an engine, growing louder, coming closer. Not a car, something bigger. They moved to the window and looked out. A black SUV was pulling into the yard, followed by a second one. Both had government plates. The vehicles stopped near the Rickman, and men in dark suits emerged. 4 of them. They moved with military precision, scanning the area before one of them pulled out a phone. "Shit," Dutch muttered. "That was fast." Marcus's heart hammered. "What do I do?" "You stay calm. You're the legal owner. They can't do anything without cause. Just don't tell them about the chamber. Not yet. Not until you know what they want." They watched as the men approached the ship. Then one of them spotted Dutch's truck and headed toward the office. Marcus barely had time to compose himself before there was a knock on the door. Dutch opened it. The man standing there was mid-40s, clean-cut, with eyes that missed nothing. "Gentlemen, I'm Agent Wilson, Department of Defense. We're looking for Marcus Hayes." "That's me," Marcus said, stepping forward. Wilson studied him for a moment. "Mr. Hayes, we need to ask you some questions about the USS Rickman and your recently deceased uncle, Raymond Hayes. This is a matter of national security." "What kind of questions?" "The kind best discussed in private." Wilson's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Marcus glanced at Dutch, who gave a subtle nod. Okay, but my friend stays with me. Wilson hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but what we discuss doesn't leave this room, understood? They sat around Dutch's desk, the 4 government agents standing while Marcus and Dutch remained seated. Wilson pulled out a folder and laid several photos on the desk. They showed the Rickman from various angles, some recent, some decades old. Your uncle purchased this vessel in 1985, Wilson began. Prior to that, it had been in mothballs for 11 years. According to Navy records, the ship was stripped of all classified materials before decommissioning. However, we have reason to believe that certain items may have remained aboard. Items related to classified operations from the Cold War era. Marcus kept his face neutral. What kind of items? That's classified, but we're authorized to conduct a search of the vessel to ensure no sensitive materials are present, with your cooperation, of course. And if I don't cooperate? Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then we obtain a warrant, but that creates paperwork, complications, public records. We'd prefer to keep this quiet, for everyone's benefit. Marcus thought about the hidden chamber, about the gold and bonds and documents, about his uncle spending 30 years protecting them, about the 17 men who died. I need time to think about it. Consult with a lawyer. Of course, but time is a factor. We'd like to resolve this within 48 hours. After they left, Marcus and Dutch sat in silence. Finally, Dutch spoke. They know something. Maybe not everything, but something. Question is, how much? My uncle's logbook mentioned they've been looking for 30 years. They must have figured out he was involved in Operation Whispertide. They're hoping to find something to confirm it. So what do we do? Marcus thought about his uncle's letter. Use it wisely. Use it well. We finish cataloguing everything. Then we figure out what it's actually worth. Then we make a plan. He looked at Dutch. You in? Kid, I was in the moment your uncle hired me 37 years ago. Let's go see what kind of fortune you're sitting on. They descended back into the chamber, this time with proper equipment. Work lights, a laptop, scales, a camera. They worked methodically, container by container. Dutch had brought reference books for coins and gems. Marcus used his phone to research bond values and gold prices. After 6 hours, they had preliminary numbers. 43 gold bars, each weighing 400 troy ounces, current market value approximately $68 million. 217 bearer bonds, face value ranging from $10,000 to $100,000 each, potentially worth another $83 million if they could be authenticated and redeemed. Rare coins and gems conservatively valued at $37 million. Intelligence documents and artifacts of unknown value but potentially priceless to collectors or historians. Total conservative estimate $188 million, potentially as high as $290 million if everything authenticated and sold at peak value. Marcus sat on the floor of the chamber, surrounded by more wealth than he'd ever imagined, and felt nothing. No joy, no excitement, just a crushing weight of responsibility. This wasn't just money. It was evidence of a conspiracy. Proof that men had died for something the government wanted buried. A secret that people had killed to protect and would probably kill again to recover. You look like you're going to be sick, Dutch observed. I think I might be. Marcus rubbed his face. I came here thinking I inherited a broken-down ship I'd have to scrap for parts. Now I'm sitting on enough money to live like a king for the rest of my life. And all I can think about is how scared my uncle must have been. 30 years of this. 30 years of knowing they were out there, looking, waiting for him to slip up. What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal a truth that powerful people have hidden for decades, and remind us why sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that come with the heaviest price. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Dutch sat down beside him. Your uncle chose you for a reason. He could have destroyed all this, could have dumped it in the ocean. Instead, he protected it, preserved it, waited until he found someone he trusted to pass it to. Someone who'd been through hell and understood sacrifice. Someone who wouldn't just take the money and run. How do you know that's what he thought? Because I knew him. Not well, but enough. Raymond Hayes was a lot of things, but he wasn't a thief. If he kept this instead of turning it in, he had a reason. And if he left it to you, he believed you'd honor that reason. Marcus thought about the memorial in the cabinet, the dog tags and tributes to 17 dead men. He wanted their deaths to mean something, wanted this to be worth what they paid for it. Then make it worth it. But first, let's figure out what the hell this actually is. They spent the rest of the day going through documents, trying to piece together the full story of Operation Whispertide. What emerged was a picture of a mission that had gone sideways from the beginning. A Soviet freighter, designation unknown, had been traveling from China to Russia when it developed engine trouble and sank in international waters. American intelligence had intercepted communications suggesting the ship was carrying valuable cargo: gold bullion, foreign currency bonds, rare artifacts looted from museums, intelligence documents. A recovery operation was authorized, but with strict secrecy. The official mission parameters were to locate the wreck, assess the cargo, and report findings. But the actual mission, documented in coded messages, was to recover everything of value before Soviet ships arrived. The USS Rickman had been chosen because it was small enough to operate covertly, but large enough to handle heavy cargo. Commander Raymond Hayes had led the operation, using experimental deep-sea recovery equipment. They'd had less than 48 hours before Soviet vessels would arrive. According to the mission logs, they'd succeeded beyond expectations. The Soviet ship's cargo hold had been intact, protected by watertight bulkheads that had sealed when the ship went down. What they'd found inside had shocked everyone. 43 gold bars, hundreds of bearer bonds from multiple countries, rare coins and gems, and intelligence documents that detailed Soviet operations across Asia. The operation had been a complete success, until they'd returned to port and received new orders. Report that the recovery had been unsuccessful. Turn over all materials to classified storage. Never speak of the mission again. Crew would be dispersed to different assignments immediately. But the cargo had never made it to classified storage. Somehow, Raymond Hayes and a few of his crew had managed to hide it, first on the Rickman while the ship was still active, then permanently once he'd purchased the decommissioned vessel. The documents didn't explain how or why, but the result was clear. A fortune that was supposed to disappear into government warehouses had vanished completely, and 17 men had died because of it. They were cleaning up, Dutch said, reading over Marcus's shoulder. Eliminating everyone who knew what was recovered. Standard procedure when something goes wrong in the intelligence world. Easier to bury evidence if all the witnesses are dead. But they missed Raymond, and he outsmarted them for 30 years. And now they've found you. Dutch pointed to the laptop screen where Marcus had pulled up news about the estate transfer. Within weeks of your uncle dying, they sent agents to check on the ship. They're not going to stop. They're going to push harder. And eventually, they're going to want to search this ship with dogs and equipment and warrants. Marcus closed the laptop. Then we move fast. We authenticate what we can. We secure the rest. And we figure out how to use this without getting killed. And how do we do that? I have no idea. But I know someone who might. That evening, Marcus made a phone call to the one person outside the military he'd trusted during his recovery, his old chaplain, Father Michael. They'd stayed in touch over the years, occasional texts, phone calls on bad days. Michael had been Navy before joining the clergy. He understood the culture, the codes, the unwritten rules. Marcus, Michael's voice was warm when he answered. It's been too long. How are you? I need help. The kind of help that can't go through official channels. A pause. Are you in danger? Maybe. Probably. I don't know yet. But I found something. Something big. Something that involves Navy operations from the 70s and people who've been keeping secrets for a long time. Tell me where you are. I'll come to you. 2 days later, Michael arrived at the shipyard. He was older than Marcus remembered, more grey in his hair, but his handshake was still strong and his eyes still sharp. Marcus and Dutch took him down to the hidden chamber, showed him everything, held nothing back. Michael walked through the space slowly, examining containers, reading documents, absorbing it all with the calm of someone who'd seen too much to be easily shocked. When he'd seen everything, he sat down on a cargo pallet and was quiet for a long time. Your uncle was one of the bravest men I've never met, he said finally. 30 years, alone, protecting this, knowing what it cost, knowing what it would keep costing. What do I do with it? Marcus asked, the question that had been eating at him for days finally spoken aloud. Michael looked at him steadily. What do you want to do with it? I want to honor those 17 men. I want their deaths to mean something, but I also want to survive long enough to make it happen. Then we build a plan, a smart one. We legitimize what we can through legal channels. We move what we can't legitimize carefully, quietly, and we use the proceeds to create something lasting, something that helps people, something that proves these men didn't die for nothing. How? Michael smiled. Son, I've been a Navy chaplain for 23 years. I know people. People who understand that sometimes doing the right thing means bending the rules. People who've been hurt by the system and would rather see this help someone in need than disappear into a government warehouse. Give me a week. I'll make some calls. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from having no other options, but real, solid hope built on trust and shared purpose. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be complicated, dangerous, and it's going to take years to do right. But if you're committed, if you're willing to honor your uncle's sacrifice and those men's deaths, then we'll find a way. After Michael left, Marcus stood alone in the hidden chamber one more time. He looked at the containers, at the wealth they represented, at the responsibility they carried. He thought about his uncle, spending 3 decades alone, protecting this, waiting for the right moment, the right person. And he thought about himself, just weeks ago, sitting in that VA office, staring at floor tiles, wondering if his life would ever be more than disability checks and cans of soup, wondering if his service had meant anything, wondering if anyone cared that he'd given everything and gotten so little back. Now he had his answer. His uncle had cared, had chosen him specifically, had believed Marcus would understand what this meant, what it represented, had trusted him to finish what 17 men had started and died trying to protect. Marcus pulled out his phone and took one final photo of the chamber, empty of people, full of secrets. Then he climbed back up the ladder, sealed the hatch, and reset the combination lock. Tomorrow, he'd start building the plan. Tomorrow, he'd start the long process of transforming a hidden fortune into something meaningful. But tonight, for the first time since his injury, Marcus Hayes felt like his life had purpose again, like he mattered, like the road ahead, however dangerous, was worth traveling. He emerged onto the deck of the USS Rickman as the sun was setting, painting the steel hull gold and crimson. Dutch was waiting there, 2 cups of terrible coffee in hand. They stood at the railing together, 2 broken veterans on a broken ship, watching the day end and feeling, against all odds, like something was beginning. "Hell of a thing," Dutch said finally. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "Hell of a thing." And somewhere in the gathering darkness, in offices and conference rooms far away, men in suits were making plans of their own, preparing to take back what they'd spent 30 years searching for. The game had changed. The secret was no longer buried, and Marcus Hayes, whether he was ready or not, was about to learn that some treasures are worth fighting for, and some secrets are worth keeping, no matter the cost. Father Michael worked fast. Within a week, Marcus found himself sitting in a secure conference room at a veterans advocacy office in Richmond, surrounded by people who operated in the shadows between official channels and necessary action. Dutch sat beside him, arms crossed, his weathered face impassive. Michael stood at the head of the table, introducing the others. "This is Patricia Vance," Michael gestured to a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes. "Retired Navy JAG attorney, forced out 10 years ago after she started asking uncomfortable questions about classified operations and missing assets." Patricia nodded curtly at Marcus. "I made a career of cleaning up messes the Navy didn't want to acknowledge. Until I became a mess they didn't want to acknowledge." "Next to her is Arthur Crane," Michael continued, indicating an elderly man with thick glasses and a professor's rumpled appearance. "Naval historian. Specializes in Cold War operations that officially never happened." "I've spent 40 years documenting ghosts," Arthur said, his voice soft but precise. "Operations that appear in fragments. Missions that leave traces in budget documents and personnel transfers but have no official records." "And this," Michael said, pointing to a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, "is Coleman Reed, marine logistics expert. 35 years moving sensitive materials without creating paper trails." Coleman's handshake was crushing. "Kid, if it needed to disappear or reappear, I made it happen, legal or otherwise." Marcus looked around the table at these people, these veterans of different wars against bureaucracy and secrecy. "Michael told you what I found?" "Enough," Patricia said. "Operation Whispertide, Soviet recovery, crew systematically eliminated, hidden cargo, and now the government's knocking on your door." "They gave me 48 hours to cooperate. That was 6 days ago." "Then they're regrouping, figuring out their approach. The question is, what do you want to do?" Marcus pulled out a thumb drive and plugged it into the laptop Dutch had brought. On the screen appeared photos of the hidden chamber, the gold bars, the documents, the memorial to the dead crew. The room fell silent as he cycled through the images. "My uncle protected this for 30 years, Marcus said quietly. 17 men died because of it. I need to understand why before I decide anything. I need to know what Operation Whispertide really was and why the government wanted it buried so badly that they killed to keep it secret." Arthur leaned forward, studying the photos. "May I see the mission documents, the actual operation logs?" Marcus handed over copies he'd made. Arthur read quickly, his fingers trembling slightly as he turned pages. After 20 minutes, he set them down and removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. "My God," he whispered, "I've been chasing this ghost for 15 years, Operation Whispertide. It appeared in scattered references, budget anomalies, personnel transfers that made no sense, but I never found the actual mission, until now." "What was it?" Marcus asked. Arthur pulled out his own laptop and opened a folder filled with documents. December 1972, a Soviet freighter, the Volkov, departed Shanghai carrying what American intelligence believed was a special cargo. The ship developed engine trouble near the international boundary of Japanese waters and sank. The Soviets immediately dispatched recovery vessels, but they were 3 days away. He pulled up a map showing the Pacific Ocean, marked with coordinates. The CIA had been tracking the Volkov because of intercepted communications suggesting it was carrying treasures looted from Chinese museums during the Cultural Revolution. Gold, rare artifacts, items the Soviet government had acquired through various means, both legal and very illegal. The operation was sanctioned at the highest levels. Get there first, recover everything, deny it ever happened. "Why the secrecy?" Dutch asked. "Because officially, the United States couldn't acknowledge conducting salvage operations in international waters without proper authorization. Because the cargo technically belonged to China, not the Soviet Union, making it stolen property. Because if word got out that we'd recovered it, diplomatic chaos would follow. China would demand it back. The Soviets would accuse us of piracy. Our own Congress would demand answers about secret operations. Patricia took over. So the plan was simple: recover it, report that nothing was found, and quietly move the cargo into classified storage where it could be studied, catalogued, and eventually used to fund black operations. Standard Cold War procedure. But that's not what happened, Marcus said. No. Arthur's voice was grim. According to your uncle's logs, something changed. Someone up the chain decided the cargo was too valuable to put through normal classified channels. Someone wanted it for themselves, or wanted to ensure it stayed hidden permanently. Coleman spoke up, his voice rough. When that happens, when something goes off the official books completely, you need to eliminate witnesses. Can't have crew members getting drunk in bars and talking about the gold they saw. Can't have divers writing memoirs 20 years later. You clean it up. Make the witnesses disappear. 17 men, Marcus said, his throat tight. Over 5 years, all made to look like accidents or natural causes. Your uncle figured it out, Patricia said, studying the logs. He saw the pattern, realized they were being eliminated one by one, so he did the smartest thing possible. He hid the cargo and went silent, made himself unpredictable, bought the ship when it was decommissioned, turned it into a secure vault and waited them out. 30 years of patience, 30 years of discipline. It's remarkable. It's tragic, Marcus corrected. He spent 30 years alone, afraid, looking over his shoulder. That's not a life, that's a prison. Arthur nodded slowly. But it worked. He outlived whoever was running the cleanup operation, kept the secret safe, and left it to someone who'd understand. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Below, Richmond traffic crawled through afternoon congestion, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the secrets buried in naval yards and government warehouses. The agents who came to see me, they weren't surprised. They were checking. They know something was recovered. They've been looking for it for decades, and now they've found me. What did you tell them? Patricia asked. Nothing. Said I needed to consult a lawyer. That bought me time, but not much. Smart. But they'll be back. With warrants next time. They'll search the ship stem to stern. Let them, Coleman said. All eyes turned to him. He smiled grimly. The chamber is well hidden. Your uncle designed it that way. Unless they tear the ship apart plate by plate, which would take months and massive resources, they won't find it. And they can't justify that level of operation without admitting what they're looking for, which they won't do because officially, Operation Whispertide recovered nothing. So we just wait? Marcus asked. No, we move, fast. We start liquidating the cargo through private channels. We authenticate what we can through international dealers who don't ask questions. We establish legal cover for why you're suddenly wealthy, and we do it before they can prove anything. Patricia shook her head. That's risky. If they catch wind of gold or bonds being sold, they'll connect it back to him immediately. Then we do it smarter, Coleman insisted. Small amounts, different sellers, multiple countries. It'll take years, but it's safer than trying to legitimize everything at once. The argument continued, voices rising as the group debated options. Marcus listened to them all, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect not just his life, but the legacy of 17 dead men. Finally, he held up his hand. Stop, all of you. Just stop for a minute. The room fell silent. Marcus turned to Arthur. You said you've been chasing this story for 15 years. Why? Because history matters. Because when governments hide the truth, people forget the sacrifices that were made. Those men on the Rickman, they were doing their jobs, following orders, and they were murdered for it. That deserves to be known. What if we tell the story? Marcus asked. What if we publish the truth about Operation Whispertide, the mission, the recovery, the murders, everything? Make it so public that they can't bury it anymore. Patricia frowned. That's dangerous. You'd be painting a target on your back. The target's already there. They know who I am. They know I have the ship. They're coming for me whether I stay quiet or not. But if the story's public, if everyone knows what happened, they can't just make me disappear. Too many eyes watching." "He's right," Arthur said, excitement building in his voice. "A full historical account, published in academic journals, documented with evidence from the logs. It would rewrite part of Cold War history. The government would have to acknowledge it or risk looking like they're covering up a cover-up." "And while everyone's focused on the historical revelation," Coleman added slowly, understanding dawning, "we quietly move the cargo. They'll be too busy dealing with congressional hearings and media questions to watch what you're doing." Michael smiled. "It's bold, risky, but it might work." Over the next 3 weeks, they built a plan with surgical precision. Arthur would write a comprehensive paper on Operation Whispertide, citing anonymous sources and newly discovered documents. He'd submit it to multiple journals simultaneously, ensuring the story got out even if one publication was pressured to kill it. Patricia would establish legal frameworks, creating a foundation to manage the cargo's eventual liquidation. Coleman would set up secure channels for moving small amounts of gold and bonds through international dealers who specialized in Cold War-era assets. And Marcus would prepare for the storm that was coming. But first, he needed to understand his uncle better. The man, not just the mission. Marcus spent days in the small Virginia Beach house Raymond had lived in, now legally his as part of the estate. It was a modest ranch-style home, sparsely furnished, meticulously maintained. No family photos, no personal mementos, just the bare essentials of living. It felt less like a home and more like a way station, a place to exist between visits to the ship. But in the bedroom closet, hidden behind a false wall that Marcus only found because he'd learned to look for such things, was a small safe. The combination was the same as the hatch on the ship, his father's birthday. Inside, Marcus found what he'd been looking for, the human pieces of Raymond Hayes, letters, dozens of them, spanning 40 years. Most were written but never sent, sealed in envelopes addressed to people who were already dead by the time the ink dried. Marcus opened them one by one, reading his uncle's neat handwriting, hearing a voice he'd never known. One was addressed to his father, David. "Brother, another year has passed and I still can't bring myself to call you. Pride is a poison, isn't it? We both drank deep, and now we're both dying of it, just slowly enough to feel every minute. I see your son's name in the paper sometimes. Marcus. Good kid, they say. Enlisted like you did. Like I did. Maybe that's the one thing we Hayes men do right. We show up when called. I think about telling you what I've been protecting, what I've been living with, but you'd tell me to do the right thing, to turn it in, to trust the system. And I can't, David. Not when the system murdered 17 of my men, not when I know what they'd do to me if I gave them the chance. So I stay quiet, stay alone, and every month I visit that ship and make sure their sacrifice meant something. It's not much of a life, but it's the only one I've got left. Your brother Raymond." Marcus's hands shook as he read. His father and uncle had both been too stubborn to reconcile. Both had died with words unsaid. And now Marcus was left holding both their ghosts, trying to understand men he'd barely known. Another letter was addressed to someone named Sarah, dated 1978. "Dear Sarah, I understand why you left, God knows I do. You asked me to choose between you and whatever secret I was keeping. I chose the secret. That makes me the villain in this story. But what you don't understand is that it wasn't really a choice. It was an obligation. To men who are dead, to families who deserve justice, to a truth that powerful people want buried. I loved you, still do. But I can't walk away from this. Can't pretend it doesn't matter. Can't let them win by giving up. So I'll stay alone. It's safer that way. For you, for anyone who might get close. This secret has already killed 17 men. I won't let it kill anyone else. I'm sorry. Raymond." Marcus set the letter down and closed his eyes. His uncle hadn't just protected a secret. He'd sacrificed everything for it. Love, family, a normal life. For 30 years, he'd chosen obligation over happiness, duty over peace. And now Marcus understood why he'd been chosen as the inheritor, because he understood that kind of sacrifice. Because he'd made similar choices in Afghanistan, put himself in danger to protect his squad, taken wounds so others wouldn't have to. The last letter in the safe was the most recent, dated just weeks before Raymond's death. To whoever finds this, I'm tired. 73 years old, and every one of them weighs like stones. But I kept my promise. 17 good men died protecting this secret, and I made sure their deaths weren't for nothing. By now, if you're reading this, you've met my nephew Marcus. Good kid, wounded in the war, came home to nothing. System failed him, like it fails so many. I watched him from a distance, saw him struggle, saw him refuse to give up even when everything told him he should. That's why I chose him. Not because we're family, hell, we never even met, but because he understands. He knows what it costs to serve. He knows what it means when the government forgets the promises it made. The cargo on the Rickman isn't just money, it's justice. Use it to help people like Marcus. People who gave everything and got nothing back. People who were told to sacrifice and then were left to rot when they did. I spent 30 years protecting this. Now it's someone else's turn. I hope I chose right. Commander Raymond Hayes, USN, Ret. Marcus sat on the floor of his uncle's closet, surrounded by letters from a dead man to other dead people, and wept. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, but from understanding. His uncle had carried this burden alone because he believed it mattered, because he'd made a promise to dying men, because he'd known that sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing, and you do it anyway. His phone buzzed. A text from Dutch. They're here. 3 vehicles, same agents. They have a warrant. Marcus dried his eyes and stood. Time to face what was coming. By the time Marcus reached the shipyard, Agent Wilson and 6 others were already setting up equipment. Dogs, metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar. They meant business this time. Marcus parked and walked toward them, trying to keep his limp minimal, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Mr. Hayes, Wilson greeted him coldly. We have a warrant to search the USS Rickman for materials related to classified naval operations. You're required to provide access to all areas of the vessel. Marcus took the warrant and read it carefully. Patricia had prepared him for this. The warrant was broad, but not unlimited. It covered the ship, but not his person. It authorized search, but not seizure without probable cause. And critically, it was based on a premise that Operation Whispertide had been unsuccessful. If they found anything, they'd have to explain how it got there, which would mean admitting the operation had succeeded. You can search, Marcus said, but I'm coming with you, and I'm documenting everything. He held up his phone. For legal protection. Wilson's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, let's begin. They spent 8 hours searching the ship, top to bottom, bow to stern. The dogs alerted on nothing because Dutch had spent the previous night scrubbing every surface with industrial cleaners, eliminating any scent traces. The metal detectors went crazy because the entire ship was metal. The radar showed dense materials everywhere, which was expected in a warship with armor plating and reinforced bulkheads. Marcus watched them work, his heart hammering every time they got near the hidden hatch. But Dutch had been right. Unless you knew exactly where to look, exactly what seemed to follow, the chamber was invisible. It looked like part of the ship's original structure, just another reinforced section in a vessel full of reinforced sections. After 8 hours, Wilson called it off. His team had found nothing. Old equipment, yes. Maintenance logs, yes. But no gold, no bonds, no evidence of Operation Whispertide's cargo. Marcus could see the frustration in Wilson's face as they packed up their equipment. This isn't over, Wilson said as he left. We'll be watching, and if anything surfaces, any gold or bonds or artifacts from that era, we'll know where it came from. Then I guess you'll be watching for a long time, Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "Because I don't have what you're looking for." After they left, Marcus and Dutch sat in the ship's galley, both of them shaking from adrenaline. "That was too close," Dutch muttered. "They brought serious equipment. If the chamber hadn't been so well hidden." "But it was. My uncle planned for this, planned for everything." Marcus pulled out his phone and called Michael. "It's done. They searched, found nothing. We're clear for now." "Good. Arthur's paper is being published tomorrow in 3 different journals simultaneously. Once it hits, the story goes public. Everything changes." "What do we do until then?" "You stay visible, stay public. Make sure people know where you are. The safest place right now is in plain sight." The next morning, Marcus stood on the deck of the USS Rickman as the sun rose, his phone buzzing with notifications. Arthur's paper had gone live at midnight. By dawn it was everywhere: military forums, history websites, news outlets. The headline read, "Operation Whispertide, the Cold War recovery mission that never happened, and the 17 men who died for it." The story was comprehensive, devastating, and carefully documented. Arthur had cited sources, included photos from the archive, reproduced sections of mission logs that didn't reveal the cargo but proved the operation had been successful. He'd listed the 17 crew members who died, along with the official causes of death and the statistical improbability of 17 men from the same small unit dying within 5 years. And he'd asked the question that would force a response. If Operation Whispertide recovered nothing, as official reports claim, why were all the participants systematically eliminated? Marcus's phone rang. "Patricia. It's working. Congressional staffers are already asking for hearings. 3 different news networks want interviews. The Navy is scrambling to respond. You did it. You made it too big to bury." But success came with a price. That afternoon, Marcus received a visit from someone unexpected. Not agents, not officials, just an elderly man who walked slowly up the gangway, leaning heavily on a cane. Dutch intercepted him, but something about the old man made Marcus call out, "Let him through." The man approached, and Marcus saw his eyes, sharp despite his age, filled with something Marcus recognized: survivor's guilt. "You're Marcus Hayes," the man said. Not a question. "Yes." "I'm John Coleman. I served on Operation Whispertide. I'm one of the 17 men who supposedly died." Marcus's world tilted. The logs said that I committed suicide in 75. Car accident, actually. They tried to kill me. Staged it to look like drunk driving. But I survived. Spent the next 48 years pretending I didn't. Seemed safer that way. "Why come forward now?" Coleman pulled out a worn photograph and handed it to Marcus. It showed a group of young sailors on a ship's deck, grinning at the camera. "That's the crew. Operation Whispertide. 3 days after we pulled that Soviet cargo out of the water. I was 24 in that picture. Now I'm 73. Every single one of those men except me and your uncle died for what we found, and I've lived with that guilt every day since." Marcus studied the photo, seeing his uncle's face among the young sailors. "Why are you here?" "Because I saw Arthur's paper, saw what you're doing, and I wanted to say thank you. For 48 years I thought we'd died for nothing, that the men who murdered my brothers had won, that the cargo was lost forever and their sacrifice was meaningless. But you proved me wrong. You finished what Raymond started." "I haven't finished anything yet." Coleman smiled sadly. "You made it public. You made it matter. That's all any of us wanted, for it to mean something." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your uncle was a good man, best commanding officer I ever served under. He saved my life twice in combat before Operation Whispertide. I should have been there for him, should have helped him protect it. But I ran, I was scared, and I let him carry that burden alone." "He understood," Marcus said softly. "His letters talked about you, about all of you. He didn't blame anyone for running. He just kept his promise." "Tell me something," Coleman asked. Did he ever find peace in those 30 years? Marcus thought about the letters, the sparse house, the life lived in service to dead men. No, but he found purpose. Maybe that was enough. Coleman nodded and walked away, his cane tapping on the deck, another ghost from a buried past finally stepping into the light. That night, Marcus sat in the hidden chamber for the last time before they started moving the cargo. He looked at the containers, the memorial, the evidence of his uncle's 3-decade vigil, and he made his decision. "We use it all," he said to the empty room, to the ghosts of 17 men, to his uncle's memory. "Every bar of gold, every bond, every penny it's worth. We build something that helps veterans like me, like all of you. We create a foundation that provides what the government won't, and we name it after you, the Whispertide Foundation. So your sacrifice is remembered, so your deaths finally mean something." His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. First sale completed. 1 gold bar through a Swiss dealer. $79,000, clean and untraceable. It's happening. Marcus looked at his own phone notification. His bank account had just received a wire transfer. For the first time in 3 years, his balance showed more than 3 digits. It was just the beginning. Coleman had said it would take years to move everything safely, but it had started. He climbed out of the chamber and sealed the hatch one final time. Tomorrow, he'd meet with architects about converting parts of the ship into a veteran resource center. Next week, he'd sit for interviews about Operation Whispertide, carefully dancing around questions about the cargo while telling the story of the men who'd died. Next month, he'd begin establishing the foundation that would turn a Cold War secret into a modern-day lifeline for struggling veterans. But tonight, he stood on the deck of the USS Rickman under a sky full of stars and felt something he hadn't felt in years: certainty. His uncle had been right to choose him, right to believe he'd understand, right to trust that he'd honor the sacrifice of 17 men who'd died protecting a secret that was now, finally, being used for something good. "I won't let you down," Marcus whispered to the night, to the ghosts, to the uncle he'd never met but understood completely. "I promise." And somewhere in the darkness, if ghosts could smile, 17 men and 1 stubborn commander were finally at peace. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, veterans advocates, and curious onlookers. Marcus sat at a long table facing a panel of senators, his dress uniform from his service days pressed and cleaned for the first time in years. The medals on his chest felt heavier than they had in Afghanistan. Beside him sat Patricia, her briefcase full of carefully prepared documents. Behind them, Dutch, Michael, and Arthur sat in the gallery, silent support in a room full of hostile questions. Senator Barbara Harding, chair of the Armed Services Committee, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Hayes, you've made serious allegations about Operation Whispertide and the deaths of 17 servicemen. The Department of Defense has provided testimony that no such operation existed. What evidence do you have to support your claims?" Marcus pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to the committee aide. Mission logs, signed orders, personnel transfers, medical records showing patterns of death inconsistent with random chance, and testimony from John Coleman, who survived an assassination attempt in 1975 and has lived in hiding for 48 years. A murmur rippled through the room. Senator Harding opened the folder, her expression shifting as she read. After a long moment, she looked up. "These documents, if authentic, suggest a cover-up at the highest levels. But they don't explain why you've come forward now. What changed?" "My uncle died," Marcus said simply. "Commander Raymond Hayes protected a secret for 30 years because he knew the truth would get him killed. But he also knew that eventually someone had to speak. He chose me because I understand what it means to serve and be forgotten, because I know what it's like when the government makes promises it doesn't keep." "Are you seeking compensation, Mr. Hayes?" No, ma'am. I'm seeking acknowledgement. Those 17 men died in service to their country, and they deserve to be honored, not erased. Their families deserve the truth, and veterans like me deserve to know that when we're told something is classified for national security, it's actually protecting the nation, not covering up crimes. Senator Harding studied him for a long moment. The committee will review this evidence, but I want to be clear. If you're found to be in possession of classified materials or assets recovered during classified operations, you could face serious legal consequences. Patricia spoke up. Senator, my client has not admitted to possessing any such materials. He has simply brought to light historical evidence of a mission that officially doesn't exist. If the mission doesn't exist, then any materials allegedly recovered during it also don't exist. The Department of Defense can't have it both ways. The logic was airtight, and Marcus could see several senators recognizing the trap. If they acknowledged the cargo existed, they had to acknowledge the mission. If they acknowledged the mission, they had to explain the 17 deaths. Either way, the truth was coming out. After 3 hours of testimony, Marcus was finally released. He walked out of the Capitol building into bright sunshine, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Dutch met him on the steps, a rare smile on his weathered face. "You did good, kid. Your uncle would be proud." "This is just the beginning," Marcus said. "Now comes the hard part." The hard part was legitimizing the foundation while quietly liquidating the cargo. Over the next 6 months, they worked on parallel tracks that never quite intersected in ways that could be legally challenged. Patricia established the Raymond Hayes Veterans Foundation as a non-profit organization with a mission to provide direct assistance to veterans struggling with disabilities, unemployment, and VA bureaucracy. The initial funding, according to public records, came from a combination of private donations and a mysterious bequest from Raymond's estate. No one could prove where the money actually originated because Coleman had done his job well, moving small amounts through so many channels that tracking them was impossible. Meanwhile, the cargo slowly disappeared from the hidden chamber. One gold bar every few weeks, sold to different dealers in different countries. Bearer bonds authenticated and redeemed through international banking channels. Rare coins placed in auction houses from London to Hong Kong. Gems sold to private collectors who asked no questions. Each transaction was small enough to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements, but large enough to build the foundation's endowment steadily. The intelligence documents and artifacts were another matter. Arthur had contacts in academic circles and private museums willing to pay substantial sums for authenticated Cold War materials. But Marcus insisted on one condition. Anything sold had to include the full provenance, including the truth about Operation Whispertide. Arthur's paper had opened the door. Now they were ensuring the story couldn't be closed again. Within 8 months, the Foundation's endowment had grown to $18 million. Enough to fund operations indefinitely. Enough to start making real change. But Marcus wanted more than just a charitable organization writing checks. He wanted something tangible, something his uncle would have built himself if he'd had the chance. He wanted to transform the USS Rickman from a tomb holding secrets into a living memorial that served a purpose. A veteran resource center, he explained to the Foundation's newly formed board. Job training, mental health counseling, legal assistance with VA claims, housing support, everything I needed and couldn't find, everything my uncle wished existed. The board, carefully selected from veterans advocates and people Michael trusted, approved unanimously. The renovation of the USS Rickman began that fall. The transformation was extraordinary. Working with naval architects and historical preservationists, they divided the ship into functional spaces while maintaining its historical integrity. The forward section became a museum documenting not just the Rickman's official service record, but the truth about Operation Whispertide. Photos of the 17 crew members lined the walls, along with their official biographies and the real stories of how they died. The hidden chamber itself became part of the tour, a powerful reminder of what had been protected and why. The middle section housed the resource center. Former crew quarters were converted into private counseling rooms. The galley became a community kitchen where veterans could gather for meals and fellowship. The officers' wardroom transformed into a legal aid office where volunteer attorneys helped navigate VA bureaucracy. The communications room became a job training center with computers and career counselors. The aft section remained functional, a working piece of naval history where veterans could learn maintenance skills, welding, electrical work, all the trades that translated to civilian employment. Dutch supervised this section personally, his decades of shipyard experience finally given purpose beyond survival. But they couldn't do it alone. Word spread through veteran networks, through news coverage of the congressional hearings, through articles about Arthur's historical revelations. People started showing up, volunteers, donors, veterans who wanted to be part of something meaningful. A retired machinist from the local shipyard donated his time to restore the engine room. A group of female veterans organized fundraising events and recruited mental health professionals. High school students from nearby towns came on weekends to scrape paint and polish brass. Local businesses donated materials, food, equipment. Even some active-duty sailors from nearby Naval Station Norfolk appeared on their off hours, drawn by the story of Operation Whispertide and wanting to honor men who'd been forgotten. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, no longer the isolated veteran living on disability checks, but a leader coordinating a movement. His days started early and ended late. He worked alongside volunteers, his bad leg protesting, but his spirit energized in ways he'd forgotten were possible. For the first time since his injury, he felt useful, needed, part of something larger than his own pain. The Foundation's work extended beyond the ship. Using the growing endowment, they began providing direct assistance to veterans across Virginia and beyond. Rent payments for families facing eviction. Medical bills the VA wouldn't cover. Car repairs so veterans could get to job interviews. Groceries, utilities. The small, crucial things that meant the difference between stability and homelessness. They established a rapid response team that could deliver emergency assistance within 48 hours of a request. No bureaucracy, no forms. Just a veteran calling and saying, "I need help," and another veteran showing up with solutions. It was everything Marcus had desperately needed 3 years ago when he was staring at eviction notices and wondering if he'd ever matter again. Stories started coming back. A Marine who'd been sleeping in his car got housed and found work as a welder. An Army medic struggling with PTSD got connected with specialized treatment and was now volunteering at the Foundation's counseling center. A Navy corpsman who'd lost both legs learned adaptive skills at the resource center and started his own business. Each story was a life changed, a promise kept, a debt repaid. Marcus kept a board in his office, now located in what had been his uncle's captain's cabin, with photos and brief notes about every veteran the Foundation had helped. Within a year, there were over 300 faces on that board. 300 people who'd been where he'd been, who'd struggled like he'd struggled, who'd found hope because 17 men had died protecting something that was now being used exactly as it should be. One afternoon, 9 months after the Foundation launched, Marcus was working on the deck when a car pulled up. A woman in her 70s stepped out, moving slowly, her face lined with years of grief. She approached hesitantly. "Are you Marcus Hayes?" "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Dorothy Kim. My husband was Lieutenant Michael Kim. He died in 1974. They said it was a training accident." Her voice broke. "But I never believed it. Michael was too careful, too skilled. And then after he died, men came to our house, went through his things, told me it was routine, but I knew something was wrong." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He'd seen Michael Kim's name in his uncle's logbook, one of the 17. "Would you like to come aboard, ma'am?" There's something I need to show you." He took her to the museum section, to the wall dedicated to Operation Whispertide's crew. There, she saw her husband's photo, young and smiling, next to a plaque that told the truth. Lieutenant Michael Kim, killed in the line of duty protecting classified materials, and the brothers who served beside him, murdered by those who feared the truth, honored now and always. Dorothy stood there for a long time, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed against her husband's photo. 50 years, she whispered. 50 years I've wondered. 50 years I've carried the weight of not knowing. She turned to Marcus. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the truth. Thank you for making his death mean something. He was a hero, Marcus said quietly. They all were. And I promise you, ma'am, as long as this foundation exists, as long as this ship floats, their sacrifice will keep helping people. Dorothy became the first of many families who came to the Rickman seeking closure. The Foundation established a special program to locate and contact relatives of the 17 crew members. Some families already knew the truth, had spent decades with their own suspicions. Others were shocked to learn their loved ones' deaths weren't accidents. But all of them found some measure of peace in knowing the story was finally told, the men finally honored. The grand opening of the USS Rickman Memorial and Veterans Resource Center was scheduled for May 15, 2 years after Marcus had first received that phone call from Jeffrey Brennan. The date was chosen deliberately. It marked the anniversary of Operation Whispertide's completion in 1973. The event drew massive attention. National media, congressional representatives. The Navy sent an admiral, though his presence was more political calculation than genuine support. Veterans organizations came from across the country, but most importantly, hundreds of veterans Marcus had helped filled the dock, wearing their service uniforms or Foundation T-shirts, present to honor the men who'd made their second chances possible. Marcus stood at the microphone on a platform built beside the ship, dressed in his service uniform, his medals catching the spring sunlight. Behind him, the USS Rickman gleamed, restored to glory, American flags flying from every mast. Beside the gangway stood 17 memorial plaques, one for each man who'd died, each bearing a photo and the truth about their service and sacrifice. 2 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady but emotional, I was living on disability checks in a studio apartment, wondering if my service had meant anything, wondering if anyone cared that I'd given everything and gotten almost nothing back. Then I inherited a ship from an uncle I'd never met, and I discovered something that changed my life. Proof that sacrifice matters. Proof that promises should be kept. Proof that sometimes justice is delayed but not denied. He paused, looking out at the crowd. He saw Dorothy Kim in the front row, along with other families of the fallen crew. He saw veterans he'd personally helped, their lives rebuilt through the Foundation's work. He saw Dutch and Michael and Patricia and Arthur, the team that had made all of this possible. And he saw, reflected in hundreds of faces, the same struggle he'd fought. The battle to matter, to be seen, to be valued. Commander Raymond Hayes and the crew of Operation Whispertide gave their lives protecting something valuable. Not gold or bonds or artifacts, though those things were recovered. They died protecting the truth. And they died knowing that powerful people wanted them silenced. For 30 years my uncle lived alone, afraid, protecting what they'd recovered, waiting for the right moment to pass it forward. Marcus's voice grew stronger. He chose me not because we were close, we never met, but because he knew I'd understand. Because he knew I'd been through my own battle with a system that promises everything and delivers too little. Because he believed I'd use what he protected to help others like me, like all of you. He gestured to the ship behind him. This vessel isn't just steel and history anymore, it's a promise kept. Every veteran who walks through these doors will find help, real help, no bureaucracy, no forms, no denials, just brothers and sisters who understand, who've been there, who refuse to let anyone else fall through the cracks. His voice broke slightly. 17 men died for this. My uncle sacrificed 30 years of his life protecting it. And now, it's finally serving the purpose it was always meant to serve, taking care of those who served. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus held up his hand. Before we officially open these doors, I want to invite the families of the Operation Whisper Tide crew to join me in a dedication ceremony. This ship now belongs to them, to their legacy, to the truth they died protecting. As a Navy chaplain led a prayer for the fallen, Marcus stood at attention, saluting the memorial plaques. Tears streamed down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let everyone see that even the strongest sometimes break. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That crying for dead heroes is the most human thing we can do. After the ceremony, as the crowd filtered onto the ship for tours, John Coleman approached Marcus. The old man moved slowly, but his eyes were bright. I served with your uncle for 2 years, knew him better than most, and I can tell you with certainty this is exactly what he would have wanted. Not a memorial to him, a mission that continues, service that doesn't end. I couldn't have done it without him, Marcus said, without all of you. You did something harder than hiding it for 30 years, Coleman replied. You turned it into something good. That takes different kind of courage, the kind your uncle knew you had. Over the following months, the Resource Center exceeded every expectation. Thousands of veterans came through its doors. Hundreds found jobs, dozens got housed, countless received counseling, legal help, medical assistance. The Foundation's model was so successful that other organizations started replicating it in different cities, using the Rickman blueprint to build their own veteran support networks. Marcus hired a staff of 20, all veterans, all people who'd struggled and survived. Dutch became the director of facilities, maintaining the ship and teaching skills to veterans looking for trades work. A former Army nurse named Sarah ran the counseling program. A Marine sergeant who'd been homeless for 3 years after his discharge became the housing coordinator. Each staff member brought their own story of struggle and redemption, making the Foundation's work deeply personal. The Foundation also established an emergency fund specifically for immediate crisis intervention. A veteran facing eviction could call a hotline and have rent money wired within hours. Someone needing medication could have it delivered same day. A family stranded with a broken-down car could get transportation assistance immediately. No questions about deserving it, no judgment, just help, because that's what brothers and sisters do. Marcus transformed personally as well. The chronic pain in his leg didn't disappear, but it mattered less when he had purpose driving him forward. The nightmares from Afghanistan grew less frequent when he was exhausted from meaningful work rather than idle desperation. The isolation he'd felt for 3 years after his injury evaporated in the daily interaction with veterans who understood, who'd been there, who never asked him to explain things that couldn't be explained. He moved out of his studio apartment into a small house near the shipyard, modest but comfortable. He bought furniture, hung pictures on the walls, adopted a rescue dog, a German shepherd who'd been trained as a service animal but whose veteran had died, leaving the dog grieving and confused. They understood each other, Marcus and that dog. Both had lost their purpose and found it again. One evening, a year after the grand opening, Marcus sat in his uncle's old captain's cabin, now his office, reviewing grant applications. The Foundation had grown so large that they were now giving money away to other veteran organizations, spreading the wealth that had come from that hidden chamber. Every dollar that left honored the 17 men who'd died. Every veteran helped was justice, delayed but delivered. His phone rang, unknown number. He almost didn't answer, memories of that first call from Jeffrey Brennan making him hesitate, but he did. Marcus Hayes? Speaking. This is Captain Jennifer Morrison, United States Navy. I'm calling on behalf of the Chief of Naval Operations. We'd like to discuss a formal commendation for Commander Raymond Hayes and the crew of Operation Whisper Tide. The Navy is prepared to acknowledge the mission, the recovery, and the subsequent cover-up. We want to make it right." Marcus leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. "After 50 years? Better late than never," Captain Morrison said. "Your uncle and his crew deserve to be honored. Their families deserve recognition. And frankly, the Navy needs to acknowledge this mistake publicly. Would you be willing to accept the commendations on their behalf?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I would be honored." The ceremony was scheduled for 6 months later at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. The Navy didn't do things halfway when they decided to make amends. The 17 crew members were posthumously awarded medals for their service, their sacrifice, and their courage in the face of corruption. Raymond Hayes received the Navy Cross, the service's second highest decoration, for protecting classified materials at great personal risk for 30 years. Marcus accepted the medals on behalf of his uncle and the fallen crew, standing in dress uniform before an audience of military brass, government officials, and families who'd waited half a century for this recognition. When the Navy Secretary pinned the Navy Cross to a display beside his uncle's portrait, Marcus finally understood what his uncle had meant about justice delayed but delivered. That night, he returned to the Rickman and placed the medals in the museum, in a place of honor beside the memorial plaques. He stood there alone in the quiet ship, surrounded by the ghosts of men he'd never met, but knew intimately through their sacrifice. "We did it," he whispered to the empty room, to his uncle's memory, to the 17 men whose deaths had finally been acknowledged. "It took 50 years, but we did it. You're heroes now, not forgotten, not erased, heroes." The ship creaked and settled, metal adjusting to the evening temperature. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was 17 men and one stubborn commander finally resting easy. 3 years after that first phone call, Marcus stood on the deck of the USS Rickman during a foundation event, watching veterans and their families tour the ship. Children ran excitedly along the corridors. Parents read the historical displays with interest. Veterans gathered in small groups, sharing stories, finding fellowship in shared experience. Dutch walked up beside him, coffee in hand as always. "Hell of a thing, isn't it?" "What's that?" "Going from nothing to this. From wondering if your life meant anything to knowing you've changed hundreds of lives. Your uncle would be proud, kid. Hell, those 17 men would be proud." Marcus thought about where he'd been 3 years ago. The studio apartment, the disability office, the overwhelming weight of feeling forgotten. And he thought about where he was now, running a multi-million-dollar foundation, helping veterans across the country, transforming a ship from a tomb into a beacon. "I'm not the same person I was," Marcus said quietly. "That guy, the one living on cans of soup and wondering if anyone cared, he's gone. This work, this mission, it rebuilt me, just like my uncle knew it would." "That's the thing about service," Dutch said. "It doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just changes shape. You found a new way to serve, a better way maybe, because now you're helping people who need it most." As the sun set over the naval yard, painting the steel hull gold and crimson, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the absence of struggle. He still hurt, still had nightmares, still carried scars both visible and hidden. But peace in knowing his life had meaning, that his service continued, that the promises made to him and broken were now promises he was keeping for others. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo he'd saved, the one from his uncle's memorial. 17 young sailors on a ship's deck, grinning at the camera, unaware of the fate waiting for them. He'd memorized every face, every name, every story. They were his brothers now, across time and death, united by sacrifice and secrets and the stubborn refusal to let their deaths be meaningless. "Thank you," Marcus whispered to that photo, to those faces frozen in time. "Thank you for dying so others could live better. Thank you for trusting someone you never met to finish what you started. I hope I made you proud." His phone buzzed with a text from the Foundation's emergency hotline. A veteran in North Carolina facing eviction needed help. Marcus pulled up the account information, authorized the rent payment, and assigned a caseworker to follow up with additional support. 5 minutes. That's all it took to prevent someone from becoming homeless. 5 minutes and the willingness to act. That was his uncle's real gift. Not the gold or the bonds or the fortune that had been liquidated and transformed. The real gift was understanding that sacrifice mattered, that promises should be kept, that people who'd given everything deserved something in return. And Marcus had taken that understanding and built something that would outlive him, something that would keep helping veterans long after he was gone. As he walked down the gangway that night, heading home to his small house and his rescue dog and a life that finally felt worth living, Marcus thought about second chances. About how sometimes the universe breaks you down completely, strips away everything you thought you were, and then, when you're certain you'll never stand again, it gives you a reason to rise. His uncle had given him that reason. 17 dead men had paid for that reason with their lives. And now Marcus was passing that reason forward, one veteran at a time, one family at a time, one life saved at a time. Anyone can inherit a fortune. But it takes something rare, something precious to turn that fortune into hope, to transform gold into purpose, to honor the dead by serving the living. Marcus Hayes hadn't just inherited a ship and a secret. He'd inherited a mission. And he'd discovered that some legacies aren't measured in dollars, but in lives changed, promises kept, and the unbreakable truth that service never ends, it just finds new forms. The injured veteran who'd once wondered if his life mattered had become the man ensuring thousands of other veterans knew their lives mattered. The warship that had held secrets for 30 years had become a beacon of hope, visible for miles. And the fortune that 17 men died protecting now protected thousands more in return. That wasn't just justice delayed and delivered. That was redemption. For Marcus, for his uncle, for every veteran who walked through the Rickman's doors and found what the government had failed to provide, a helping hand, a listening ear, and the simple acknowledgement that their sacrifice had value, their struggles mattered, and they were not forgotten. As the lights of the shipyard faded behind him, Marcus smiled. Tomorrow he'd be back on that deck, working alongside veterans, changing lives, honoring the dead by serving the living. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was so much better than anything he could have imagined. Because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones you find hidden in darkness. They're the ones you create by bringing that treasure into the light and using it to illuminate the path for others who are still lost in their own darkness, still struggling, still wondering if anyone cares. Marcus cared. His uncle had cared. 17 men had died caring. And now, finally, after 50 years and $290 million and countless lives changed, that caring had created something permanent, something meaningful, something that proved beyond any doubt that service, sacrifice, and stubbornness can change the world. One veteran at a time, one day at a time, one promise kept at a time, the end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering tales of courage, redemption, and the incredible things that happen when ordinary people refuse to give up. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that every veteran deserves a second chance, that every sacrifice should be honored, and that sometimes the greatest fortunes are the ones we give away.